Trackers gonna live the nation, and Spectrum's got such supervision. M.a.s.k is the mighty power that could save the day. M.a.s.k, no one knows what lies behind the mask charade. M.a.s.k, always riding out on Venom's trail. Comes to the laser rays, fire away.
Hey everybody, it's Bill from Matt-Trakker.com and welcome to this episode of Behind the Mask. Many years ago, I was contacted by a gentleman named Lance Anderson. If you don't know the name by now, he is pretty much responsible for coming up with the mask logo, the one that you see today. And before I had this medium of being able to interview people through camera, face to face, so to speak, we did a text interview. And one of the biggest regrets I have is that before Lance passed away, I never really got a chance to talk with him more because his insights on the creation of the logo and just his time with Kenner was really profound. I often credit Lance for the website carrying on because there was a point in time where it was like, what's the point of continuing this? What's the point of doing this? And Andy and Gordon, if you're watching, you can speak to what I'm about to say. Lance just sent a bunch of stuff to us. He sent the sticker sheets. If you haven't seen that, I'll put it here. That he would use to create the logo. He sent concept art and shared his knowledge. And getting that information and being able to really kind of be able to share it with everybody, it really meant a lot to me, and I hope it meant a lot to you as well. Now, during this, one-on-one interview, I'll be reading the question and then reading Lance's answer out loud. But during it, too, I'll have some of the concept art up as well. And going along the way, if you have any questions about anything, post it in the comments. I'll answer the best I can. My focus is going to be a little bit lower because I'm going to be reading off his answer. But he passed away on May 24th, 2012. And I still think about him to this day as somebody who helped keep M.a.s.k alive, and he really did. Lance, I hope you're resting well. And I hope that you know that the work that you did and how you inspired is still carrying on today. So I do thank you for that. And without further ado, let's jump into the interview and I'll read it out loud here for you. So when I first gave this to Lance, I asked him for like a little blurb about himself. So I'm going to make sure I read this to honor him correctly. My name is Lance Anderson, and I had worked for a number of years in Japan in the Far East for a publishing company prior to working for Kenner Toys in the mid-'80s. M.a.s.k was a huge breakout hit. I was very excited to have been part of the line since its inception. I was based in Charleston, South Carolina, and everything was done through DHL. DHL is a shipping service, except with face-to-face meetings in Cincinnati, Ohio at the corporate offices. Other toy lines I worked on were Rose Petal Place. There were a couple animated specials with these characters, and Marie Osmond was the voice. Silverhawks, which was a huge hit. I put a tremendous amount of work on a toy line called Mega Force that was pretty successful, but there was no TV series to go along with to add the popularity. I also worked on some other lines that were not too successful, such as Battle Brawlers. The reason the Toy Biz had such a downturn after Silverhawks was the pressure to put on TV to not promote toys with TV shows. So I'll keep going here in a second. Yeah, pretty much. Like I don't know if it was like the FCC or something like that, but they're like, you guys got to stop this. You can't make a 30-minute or 20-minute episode. It's a commercial. So that was a thing. Of course, Disney and Sesame Street were the big lobbyers behind that push to not have the commercial tie-ins. After the toy business, I worked in the wildlife business, producing magazines and publicity for an outdoor organization at Piedmont Technical College in Greenwood, South Carolina. So there's a little backstory on Lance. So my first question was, were you in charge of designing the logos and the packages? Everything was done as a collaborative effort with varying degrees of input from each person involved in each stage of the project. I would create and draw up widely varied logo ideas and submit them to committees for review. Each idea would be numbered and suggestions were made for each idea the committee wanted to pursue further. I came up with hundreds of ideas and variations before the final logo design was settled on. Suggestions were usually pretty specific, such as pull helmet shape down more and change ridges on mouthpieces from vertical to horizontal. From the May 9th, 1984 Cincinnati meeting. Eventually, the design was approved and signed off on by the project manager, Jim Block, and a few other folks, and I would then draw up a final logo. All the work was done by hand. There was no computer-generated lettering or gimmicky, just India ink or illustration board. As the final logo for M.a.s.k neared, I designed the Venom logo, which went through fairly quickly. A note of interest is that the early days of Venom stood for vicious, evil nature of man. I think I may still have the original black and white drawings of those logos. So there's one right there that you probably didn't know, that vicious, evil nature of man was a concept for Venom. Question 2, how long did it take to finalize the M.a.s.k logo and Venom logo? I began working on the project in January 1984. It was initially called AT Wheeler, and some of the vehicles were called AT Wheeler and Tractor, or AT Wheeler Tractor Rig and AT Wheeler Villain Bronco. The marketing strategy was to provide a unique vehicle figure fantasy concept based on changing real-life ordinary vehicles into extraordinary action vehicles. You're learning a lot. And this is why I credit Lance for like helping continue everything, because the knowledge that he gave us was hands down invaluable. Deception was stressed as the main quality of this line of toys, in which each vehicle is not as it appears and turns into something else. The bad guys were to be led by General Miles Mayhem, Contra World. Not sure what that means. And the good guys were led by Matt-Trakker, spelled Tracker at that time. The Peaceful Nations Alliance, who was the lone survivor of an ambush in the Middle East. So that was going to be the main elements. Within a few weeks of my involvement, the name was changed to M.a.s.k, and I also began working on package designs. By August, the logo was still being tweaked according to my old job sheets, and I don't believe it was finally finished until beginning of November. Venom was probably finished by the end of November as well. Without a doubt, this was the most time I had spent working on a logo. So he spent a lot of time on those logos. Was this the first successful project you had been a part of? At the time I began working on M.a.s.k, I had been involved in a few other toy projects, most notably was a very well done line of scented dolls. Rose Petal Place. I never heard of it before this, so if you had any, feel free to comment on what they are. Rose Petal Place, that was done in cooperation with Dave Kirshner Productions. I hope I got that right. The toys were to accompany a series of television specials, which Lance kind of talked about in his opening, that featured the voice of Marie Osmond. And for those of you who don't know who the Osmonds are, you are way out of the demographic of watching this show. I did a lot of design work for the packaging and painted up all the illustrations used by Kenner, but the actual design and look for the characters was done by Kirshner's artist, a very talented lady that I never got a chance to meet. I wonder who that is. Unfortunately for Kenner, they had trouble with the suppliers in the Far East and were unable to meet timely delivery with toys, and as a result, sales were disappointing. When a show airs on TV and the child wants the toy, it had better be available or the sales are lost. Despite the poor delivery record, the line was pretty successful and lasted for about 3 years. So I don't know if any of you have watched the Toys That Made Us. This kind of happened with Kenner with the Star Wars line as well. And they gave you, you know, here's a piece of cardboard that says you're going to get this. If Kenner hadn't thought of that at that point, the Star Wars line might not have ever even come to existence, to be honest. So that's part of what he's talking about here. So think about that. That's pretty unique. Was there any logo design? This is a question. Next question. Were there any logo designs other than the final one that could have been the logo that went into distribution? As I was designing logo possibilities, the initial focus was on the idea that the vehicles changed, and a lot of the earlier logo studies reflected that push. However, as the project evolved and the storyline developed, the concept of using masks that have powerful capabilities became the dominant idea. Since the masks were still in planning stages, I had no frame of reference on how they would eventually look. Just pause there for a second. So a lot of people go, why is it not Spectrum and Thunderhawk and everything and in the logo? Well, that's part of it right there. If you're working on something and it hits a home run even before you get to everything in the end, it's going to happen that way. As you can see from the final logo, there's no relationship to any of the masks that were eventually used in the storyline. So a lot of people say that it looks like, the what do you call it? Ultra Flash mask, but it's not really that mask itself. So keep that in mind. But they're still effective without being specific. The use of the vehicle is important in the fact that it is what the concept was built around, but it doesn't show a dramatic change from the ordinary to the spectacular. Some of the designs I did explored that idea, and I felt that was a direction to go with initially, but over time, dual purpose logo seemed to be the best. Anyway, to answer the question, although a number of different designs would have been just as effective as the final one, there was no other one that could have been put into production. There were two main reasons for that. One, the Venom logo was tied stylistically to the M.a.s.k logo. And two, the time factor that was involved, printing and production, delivery schedules, and television production deadlines. So maybe with a little bit more time, we would have had a different logo. Like everybody says, like it's the Ultra Flash mask. It looks like it, but it's really not. And that's something to think about. A lot of people do convey that it's not the same thing. And this is coming from the guy who built it, drew it from, ground up. So it's really odd that you would have something like that. Like you make a logo of something and half of it doesn't even have to do with a show, like a cartoon. Something to think about. As an artist, which of the pieces that you worked on was most enjoyable? That's the question I asked Lance. Drawing vehicles was very time consuming. Just ask Kerouac. I know he loves drawing Raven. So ask him about that. And it took great pains in creating an accurate looking vehicle in an environment that would seem natural and realistic. Since the vehicles were the real focus of the illustrations and the masks were not shown in action very often, I enjoyed the opportunity to portray the mask capabilities. I think there are some blister cards that show that action. There are, not many, but you were right though about the vehicles being the main focus, and that goes like if you watch episode 3 of Talking Mask or the retro blasting episode, the vehicles and the vehicles are the main thing. Having figures themselves would be okay, but they're linked. So I hope that does happen someday where we get a relaunch of something, but the vehicles have to be there. That's the duality of them. Almost a symbiote almost was really what sold us and helped keep us going with it for 35 years, where no other entity has even taken the time to even try to resurrect it except for IDW, but they did it incorrectly. Because of the large quantity of illustrations I had to produce, I was also working on other toy lines at the same time. I would be working on the preliminary sketches to wait for approval from the product manager, but at the same time, I would work on the final pencil rendering for another. I would spend anywhere from 15 to 40 hours drawing up a final detailed illustration, which with accurate lettering and everything else imaginable included. The final drawing would then go to an airbrush specialist who would apply the color over the pencil. Because of the tight deadlines, I would often spend all night working, but I loved it. Only about 15% of the art was I able to spend the time on to personally complete an illustration from pencil to paint. It was a process that was similar to comic book art, where one person did the pencils and the other and then an inker finished up the work. That is commonplace. So, a lot of it's going to be early concepts that Lance did were pencil drawings for the most part, and then you would see everything else finished. I wonder who that inker was. I'd like to talk to that person one day too. To apply that process specifically to M.a.s.k, comics from DC, Kurt Swan did the pencils, Murphy Anderson or Kurt Schaffenberger, I hope that's right, inked over the pencil for reproduction. Kurt Swan, by the way, was always my favorite comic book artist, and he did an entire run of the series. I was absolutely thrilled. But back to the question. So I need to look those two guys up. Back to the question. My favorite was an oversized point of purchase display that showed the number of vehicles in action in an interesting environment. Attached is a series of photos that show a length. I will take this opportunity to complain. The painter that did many of the early images spent no time at all on the tedious backgrounds that I created. They were tedious and spectacular. He would go over my pencil backgrounds with a marker in a very sketchy manner and then airbrush on top of that, but he did a good job on most of the vehicles. Although Condor was pretty badly done, one image that he did do that I was very pleased with was Thunderhawk. The painter that did Raven had the style I was very happy with. So Thunderhawk was okay in Lance's eyes from the person that did the concept, but Raven was the one he was very pleased with. So think about that for the box design. I don't have Raven over here, but it gives me kind of an incentive to get Raven and get the box design and get it in the collection. Next question. As an artist, which of the pieces that you worked on did you like the least? This is strictly, it doesn't mean you don't like the vehicle or anything like that. It's just it's hard to, some of these might be harder to draw. Each of the initial line was as exciting and fun process. I got to be involved in each one intensely. The same with the racing series, which, by the way, would probably be hugely popular today, of the nationalism of NASCAR. At the time, it was still a Southern-oriented sport that I personally was quite familiar with, having been the races in nearby Darlington. I thought the split seconds would be great, but it kind of deviated. But the kind of deviation in some of the later ones just were not interesting to do. And besides, I was very involved in aspect of Silverhawks at the time, doing each from pencil to paint. So Lance's point is, if NASCAR was more popular everywhere, that the racing season might have caught on a little bit more. I can't speak for that time because at that point in time, I was probably at that point, I think I liked football too. So I was probably an Eagles fan. Not now. I don't care about football. Phillies and Flyers fan and Sixers. I never really gravitated to NASCAR. So he makes a good point. And think about it too. Were you a fan of NASCAR at that time? So think about when it was like 1987. Were you a fan of NASCAR? If you were, it might have really kicked in like, hey, I like this more or less. So let me know in the comments there. Another question. What were some of the different variations of the names you've seen for creation of vehicles? So the list he gave is Thunderhawk. Some of the names here. The Chameleon. Proposed names for the leader were Matt-Trakker, Duke Hunter, and Grant Noble. Rhino, Trojan Horse, Command Cruiser, Wall Buster Gator. Dust driver, gator, dust diver. I don't know what that means. The frog. Proposed names for the driver were Dusty Hayes, Tug Malone, and Dash Davis. So Dusty was originally shoehorned for Rhino. Pretty cool. Firecracker, you had Battle Dog and War Dog. Proposed names for the driver were Russell Maggs, Cliff Archer, and Austin Ames. Condor, Whirly Bike. Proposed names for the driver were Mike Avery, Willie Gears, Chopper McGee. In addition, there were proposed helicopter for M.a.s.k team to be called Switchblade, which proposed names for the driver Marshall Air, Buddy Hawks, and Sky Masters. A jet tank vehicle, Treadwing Terror, Condor, Dreadwing, driven by Miles Mayhem. An armored vehicle, Hydrocycle, proposed drivers were Arlo Rocks, Gus Brocker, and Herman Rake. A turbo tank vehicle, which with proposed drivers Randall Payne, Clay Stalker, and Sylvester Sly Wheeler. So when you're thinking about a creative process, you can kind of see where you throw stuff out. You just fire it off, right? And something will stick. It might not be for the thing that you're targeting, but it will, it could be used for something else. And that's exactly what you see here. Some of those names are really unique. It's pretty cool. With Toyline, what were some of the vehicles based on? Originally, the idea was to use just basically ordinary vehicles that could change into really unusual and extraordinary fighting vehicles. M.a.s.k was a hybrid of Transformers and G.I. Joe. That comes from somebody that worked directly on everything, except for like the production line. So there you go. Taking the best of both with a new twist. Some of the Transformers were really just silly gimmicks, changed just for sake of change. But the overall concept was very effective and still is, and he's not wrong about that. This was done, I did this interview with him in like 2008 and just 2020. So think about that. The Transformers continue to have a life because the comics have kept them going throughout the years. Not only the comics, but you had a lot of toy lines just keep going. Animated series keep going. And we don't have that. The M.a.s.k toy line was created before the animated episodes that the animators had to work with the existing concepts. So think about that too. The toy line superseded the cartoon. Oh, could you imagine being the illustrator who had to draw Billboard Blast? Ugh. Here's this thing. All right. Another question. In the first episode, Toyline, all the M.a.s.k vehicles are colored bright red orange except for Condor, while all the Venom vehicles are colored dark bluish black. Did they do this on purpose to make it easier for the kids to see who was good and bad, or was this a pure coincidence? Lance's answer was very observant, but I do not recall anyone ever writing speaking about a specific color range for the good versus bad, so it probably just a coincidence. However, the study of color does have many subtle implications, and without realizing it, color choices were quite possibly made with good versus bad. The Condor in the mix really messes up a great theory. That was a good question I asked a long time ago. I've gotten dumber, I think, over the years, but it's a kind of an interesting concept if you think about it. Think about the colors of all the vehicles real quick. All right. So Switchblade is like a deep blue, Piranha's black, with other elements in it. Jackhammer's black. And Mantha wasn't in the first series. And then you look at everything else, you have Thunderhawk red, Rhino red, Gator orange, Condor greenish. You think about the earth tones of things, but I think if the question was asked again today, green would be like a color of good. So I think it holds up merit. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. What was your primary medium for the M.a.s.k packages? Airbrush, I asked. Yes, but I answer with qualifications because while I drew the illustrations for the packages, I did not paint all of them. Kenner had a stable of illustrator specialists that did many of the painted portions. For example, most of all of the folks painting were specialists in rendering vehicles. With the airbrush, and you can see by the work on the vehicles, they were very good. However, some were very weak in rendering the detailed backgrounds, even sloppy, and some were weak in rendering the characters in action. When I painted a package, I would use gouache and opaque watercolor and mix it up to a milky consistency to use in an airbrush. So, like, this is what I wish if Lance was, still with us today, I'd love to be able to like follow up on that. Like, which ones did you not like? Because at the time, I didn't know what questions to ask. It was, the Phillies probably just won the World Series, and I was ecstatic. I was just firing questions away. So, but yeah, it's something to think about on that front. How involved were you in the actual design process for the toy and character concepts? Initially, not at all. The team that established the concepts and toys were not designers or illustrators, but engineers and specialists in making ideas into practical reality. It is one thing to come up with a really cool idea, but a totally different matter to put an idea into workable action. After time, the exchange of ideas was very active, and I saw a few of my designs incorporated into the line. He didn't elaborate there, which I wish I followed up on that. So, Gordon, you might know that. If you're watching this episode, jump in here and let me know. Last question. Was there anything you designed for Kenner that didn't make it that you were really fond of? I love M.a.s.k. and thought it should go on for years and years. Once I proposed a line of endangered species toys that I thought was very relevant at the time, but Kenner turned it down. Of course, a few years later, another company came out with a similar concept and it did pretty well. At the time, Kenner was Kenner Parker, which meant they also put out games. I pitched a game based on how quick the player could identify a phrase on a license plate using minimal letters, and it was called Lysanity. They passed on that one also. So that was the interview I did with Lance years ago. Actually, it was 2006 I did this one. So the Phillies didn't win the World Series yet. They were still kind of irrelevant. Man. Think about all those little tidbits and details you got out of that, that reading. Think about what could have been. Like, do you agree? Like, you have all these names out there. You have the character designs. Which ones did you not like, and which names really stuck out to you, and which ones kind of fade away in memory? I'm always going to be grateful for Lance's contribution to M.a.s.k. And if anybody else worked with him on these concepts and, through this development, I would love to be able to talk with you, because you're equally as important, but I don't know who you are because you're not named and you're not mentioned. There's so many things that I wish I could talk to Lance about today. But like I said earlier, I just really hope that he knows that his legacy is being carried on. And I hope that he's resting well. And, we'll get M.a.s.k. back out there again, Lance. We're doing our best. We have a really good community, and a lot of that credit goes to you. Even though it was years ago, without your contribution to the website and to the other websites out there, we might not be on the path that we're on now. So everybody, please, in the comments, say thank you to Lance. If you watch this far into the video, I'll say thank you to Lance right here. Thank you, Lance. And please remember to like, comment, and subscribe to help keep M.a.s.k. alive. And this is Bill from Matt-Trakker.com, and I'll talk to you later.
Spectrum sky.